All right, Larry Krueger here from the Pig and a Pickle Krug Show with a little 49er video. Who stands between the Niners and their sixth Lombardi trophy? We'll get into that coming up next. First, we're brought to you by Pig and a Pickle, the best barbecue in all of Northern California. Check them out. They're in Emeryville and Corte Madera. They're open 7 days a week from 11 a.m. till 8 p.m. or until they run out. Pig and a Pickle, the best barbecue in all of Northern California. This video is brought to you by Sharp Corners, Sports Cards, and Collectibles, 205 Cypress Avenue in Pacific Grove, California. Give my friend Anthony Catania a call. He's at 831-521-5264. Well, the one thing about the NFL is you just never know year to year who's going to be the good teams. You know, since the NFL began their 17-game regular season back in 2021, there have been at least 4 new division winners every year. So expect a lot more turnover at the top of the standings in 2024. Now, last year's division winners were the Niners, Tampa, Dallas, and Detroit in the NFC, Buffalo, Houston, Kansas City, and Baltimore in the AFC. And, of course, we all know Kansas City would go on and win the Super Bowl. This season, I kind of think the 4 new division winners are going to be Philly instead of Dallas, Atlanta instead of Tampa, Cincy instead of Baltimore, and Green Bay instead of Detroit. That's kind of how I see the playoff picture unfolding. And obviously, there's a lot that goes into it. Schedule, the injuries, there's a lot of things that happen as the season goes on that impact who winds up in the playoff tournament. But that's what I'm looking at this year. I think it will be, the Niners are going to be in again. I think definitely you're going to get Buffalo in again. I think Houston's in again. I think Kansas City's in again. But Baltimore, Detroit, and Dallas, I think, wind up losing out to Cincinnati, Green Bay, and Philadelphia as far as division winners. So let's go through each division and talk a little bit about the teams that I think potentially can stand in front of the 49ers. So let's start with the AFC East. Now, a lot of people like Buffalo. They won the division last year. I project them to win the division again this year. Miami also is an interesting team with a ton of speed. But to me, the wild card team in that AFC East are the New York Jets. And are they ready for prime time with Aaron Rodgers, who's back from the Achilles rupture? The Jets have 6 primetime games before their Week 12 bye. They also have a Week 5 game against the Minnesota Vikings that's in London. And we're going to find out under the bright glare of primetime football, can the Jets hang? The Jets, one of the premier teams. Is Aaron Rodgers can, with some phenomenal young talent around him, can Aaron Rodgers carry the New York Jets to a playoff berth and some kind of a Super Bowl run? Now, they added Mike Williams. They have Garrett Wilson at receiver. They drafted Malachi Corley. They've improved their offensive line. They've got some new starters on the offensive line. Tyron Smith is the new left tackle. Morgan Moses is the new right tackle. He comes over from Baltimore. So they changed up 3 names on their 3 of their 5 offensive linemen. You got a healthy Rodgers. You got a couple good backs, really 2 or 3 or 4 good backs. Breece Hall, Braylon Allen, Isaiah Davis, Izzy Abanikanda. They've got some backs. They got a pretty good defense, too. Hassan Reddick, Quinnen Williams, Jermaine Johnson, and former Niner Javon Kinlaw on their front. They also have Will McDonald. You got Sauce Gardner on the back end. You got DJ Reed on the back end. They brought in Chuck Clark, I should say, from Baltimore. He's a pretty good player. So they've got CJ Mosley at middle linebacker, who's a very smart inside backer. So, the Jets are interesting. And are they ready for primetime? I would say that they're not quite ready for primetime. I don't think they're going to stand between the Niners and the 6th Lombardi. But I think that they could very well be a postseason team. Now let's jump to the AFC North. The big question in this division, I think, is just simply how healthy is Joe Burrow? The Browns and the Steelers both made the playoffs last season. The AFC North, though, seems like a 2-team race between the Ravens and the Bengals this year. And they both have elite quarterbacks. The Ravens have Lamar and the Bengals have Burrow. And since 2021, either the Bengals or the Ravens have won the AFC North title every single year. Cincinnati won the division in 2001 or 2021, 2022, and then the Ravens won it last year. So Joe Burrow has played more than 10 games in only 2 of his 4 NFL seasons thus far. And in both of those seasons, the Bengals won the division and played in the AFC title game. And they're saying he could be in the running this year for the Comeback Player of the Year award again if he can lead the Bengals into the playoffs and get their first AFC North division title, or I should say third division title in the last 4 years. So I think the Bengals are an underrated football team. And I think last year when they came to Levi's and beat the Niners, they looked impressive. They really did. And you still have T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, and they added Mike Gesicki at tight end. They've upgraded their offensive line. They've got Zach Moss as their number 1 runner now in the backfield. They added Amarius Mims. He may start at right tackle. I think that's kind of an interesting addition. And then on defense, it's still a pretty good front line. Trey Hendrickson, Sheldon Rankins, B.J. Hill, Sam Hubbard. They drafted Chris Jenkins out of Michigan. They drafted McKinley Jackson out of Texas A&M. They drafted Cedric Johnson out of Ole Miss. All those guys are going to be players on their front. They added a good linebacker in Aaron Casey from Indiana. They've added some good players. I mean, they really have. And they've got a good secondary, a lot of speed back there. Cam Taylor-Britt, Von Bell, Geno Stone is a good center fielder. Mike Hilton's a good nickelback. They got a great kicker in Evan McPherson. This is a good football team, really good football team. Lou Anarumo is a good defensive coordinator. Zach Taylor, obviously the head coach. So I think, the big question is, I think Cincinnati's a major Super Bowl contender this year. I think Burrow will be healthy, and I look for the Bengals to be maybe the team coming out of the AFC that can stand in front of the 49ers. Now, AFC South, last year was Houston's year. This year, I get the feeling it might be the Colts' year. Is this the year that Anthony Richardson begins to dominate the AFC South? He looked dynamic as a rookie last year. Now, he suffered a season-ending shoulder injury in Week 5, and he finished his rookie year with 577 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 pick. He ran for 136 yards and 4 scores, and they lost Richardson early in the year, and they still had the 10th-ranked scoring offense with Gardner Minshew at quarterback. They've got Jonathan Taylor behind running the rock. He missed 7 games because of an ankle and a thumb injury. But Shane Steichen's a pretty good coach, and I think he's a pretty good play caller. And I just think that the Colts might be, I know Houston's a phenomenally talented team. They made an amazing trade for Deshaun Watson, and it's really, fueled the emergence of their roster. I mean, the Texans won 3 games 2 years ago, and they were the surprise team. But now you look at the Colts in the offseason they just had. They have Michael Pittman and Josh Downs. They just added Adonijah Mitchell. Anthony Gould is a speedster wide receiver. You still have Richardson. You got a running threat in Jonathan Taylor. You got a running threat at quarterback in Richardson. You got a bunch of good tight ends. Jelani Woods, Mo Alley Cox, Will Mallory. They got a bunch of tight ends. They got a good offensive line. Defensively, good front line with Buckner, who was re-signed, Kwity Paye, Samson Ebukam, and some talented young defensive backs. Kenny Moore is a phenomenal nickelback. Nick Cross, good free safety. Juju Brents is a big corner. And they added some more players back there. So I don't think the Colts are a Super Bowl team that's going to stand in front of the 49ers, but I would not be surprised if the Colts made some noise in that AFC South. Now, the AFC West, the big question is this the year that Jim Harbaugh steps right in and wins right away? I mean, with the exception of, the San Diego Toreros, Harbaugh's teams have won more games in his first year than the year before he arrived. In 2009, the Niners went 6-10. They finished 3rd in the NFC West. The next year, Harbaugh's first year, they went 13-3, and they won the NFC West, and they made it to the NFC title game, and then they made it to the Super Bowl the next year. So I think Harbaugh is that kind of a guy that turns programs around fast. And the Chargers finished last in the AFC West last year at 5-12, and they're going to need their wide receivers. They're either going to need to trade for a wide receiver, Brandon Ayuk, or they may need to just get their young receivers to play. They got Joshua Palmer, Quentin Johnston from TCU, second-year player, and then the second-rounder Ladd McConkey from Georgia. can these guys step in for Keenan Allen? Can they step in for Mike Williams? I mean, that's a big question. Or is this going to be a run-heavy attack with Greg Roman featuring, Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins? So either way, if you look at the Chargers on defense, there should be quite a bit of improvement from what they were last year to what they are this year. Jesse Minter comes over as the defensive coordinator from Michigan with Harbaugh. But they've got some of the great individual defensive talents in the sport. I mean, they added Poona Ford, who gives them a big body up front, but you got Joey Bosa on that front line. You got Denzel Perriman, Khalil Mack, Asante Samuel, Derwin James. I mean, they've got some really good players, and there's more there. I mean, beyond that, I think Cam Hart, the rookie from Notre Dame, is going to help them quite a bit. And they drafted Kamani Vidal, who's another running back who should help with Dobbins and Edwards, and I could see the Chargers running the ball quite a bit. You got Rashawn Slater, who's a Pro Bowl left tackle. You just drafted Joe Alt in the top 10, so now you got bookend premier tackles. I still think it's Kansas City's division to win, but if you told me the Chargers got in as the wild card and made a run to the Super Bowl and were there in New Orleans against the 49ers, Harbaugh's second Super Bowl in New Orleans against Kyle Shanahan and the 49ers, I could see it. I could absolutely see it. So don't sleep on the Chargers. All right, let's jump to the NFC. I mean, the big question in the NFC is what kind of impact are the Eagles' new coaches and new coordinators going to make? Following the 2022 campaign, the Eagles lost, or 2023 campaign, they lost, or 2022, they lost Shane Steichen to the Colts and Jonathan Gannon to the Cardinals. And then they promoted the quarterback coach, Brian Johnson, to offensive coordinator and hired Sean Desai as the defensive coordinator, despite the fact he had no experience. And then Desai lost the play calling responsibilities to Matt Patricia late in the season. I don't think that really had much of an impact. As far as in terms of scoring and total yards on both offense and defense, the Eagles took a major backstep last year. On defense, they fell to 30th in points allowed and 26th in yards allowed. I mean, this was a premier defense the year before when they had gone to the Super Bowl. Last year, they're 30th in points allowed, 26 in yards allowed. Their pass defense was an absolute joke. They couldn't stay within a country mile of the Buccaneers' offensive receivers in that playoff matchup. And the Eagles' offense finished in the top 8 in both scoring and yards, but by the end of the season, they were really struggling. They averaged only 18.9 points per game between week 13 and the NFC wildcard round. So now Johnson's out and Desai's out, and stepping in for Johnson is Kellen Moore, and his resume is quite a bit more impressive. And stepping in for Desai is Vic Fangio, and Fangio is the master. He's one of the great defensive coordinators in the sport. So is that enough? They made some moves. They brought in Devin White. They brought in Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. They brought in the draft, Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean. I mean, the Eagles had a nice little offseason for sure. Signing Chauncey Gardner-Johnson back from Detroit, I think, is huge. But Fangio coordinating the defense, Kellen Moore coordinating the offense, Saquon Barkley now in the backfield. The Eagles look like they're once again a monster. But I think the big one is Kellen Moore and Vic Fangio. Those are the big additions, those two coordinators. And I think Philadelphia absolutely is a team that is standing in front of the 49ers or standing between the 49ers in that 6th Lombardi. So they are a team to watch for sure. All right, let's move to the NFC North. I think the big question in this division is who's improving faster, the young Detroit Lions or the young Green Bay Packers? The Lions look like they're coming. I mean, if you look at the Lions, they almost beat the Niners in the NFC Championship game. They've got everything that you need to win. The head coach gained some valuable playoff experience last year. It was a painful lesson, but I'm sure he learned it. They got two big-time runners in Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. Goff is always the question. Is he good enough to get it done? But he's got an all-world tight end in Sam Laporte. He maybe has the best young offensive line in the game. Penei Sewell at right tackle. Kevin Zeitler, the veteran, comes over from the Ravens. He's at right guard. Frank Ragnow is terrific. He's the center. Graham Glasgow slides in at left guard. Taylor Decker is the left tackle. He's terrific. They also drafted Christian Mahogany out of Boston College. I thought that was one of the steals of the draft. Weapons-wise on the outside, you got the burner, Jamison Williams. You got maybe one of the best receivers in the entire league, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. So you added Isaiah Williams from Illinois. That's another good receiver in the draft. And then on the defensive side, last year it was Aiden Hutchinson up front all by himself. Now they added DJ Reader in free agency, Marcus Davenport in free agency, Mekhi Wingo in the draft. They've got some guys. I mean, they've added some guys up front. So now Hutchinson's got Davenport on the other side, and Reader is an absolute, run clogger inside. You still have Aleem McNeil. Jack Campbell's a terrific linebacker. And then in the secondary, look what they've done in their secondary. They had Brian Branch. They had Kirby Joseph. But then they added Carlton Davis from Tampa in free agency. You got a healthy Emmanuel Mosley coming back. They drafted Terrion Arnold in the first round out of Alabama. They drafted Enos Rakestraw in the second round out of Missouri. Two really, really good corners. So you had Rakestraw and Arnold to the secondary. Then you also added Amik Robertson and Carlton Davis in free agency. So you added 4 really, dependable corners. That was their weakness. So Detroit is absolutely coming. And the only thing that can hold them back, and the only reason I kind of think Green Bay is going to be the division winner, is Jordan Love. Jordan Love is playing at a really high level. They just added Josh Jacobs. They have a good offensive line. You've got a bevy of young receivers. This might be the best young receiving core in all of football. Christian Watson, Romeo Dobbs, Jaden Reed, Bo Melton, Dontavion Wicks. All those guys can play. They've got 2 tremendous young tight ends in Tucker Kraft and Luke Musgrave. And then defensively, they added Edgerrin Cooper at middle backer. He's probably going to start. Tyron Hopper from Missouri is a good player. Linebacker. They added Javon Bullard in the secondary. He's probably going to start at free safety. Ketan Oladapo from the Pac-12 from Oregon State. He's a nice safety. So the Packers are a young team with an ascending quarterback, and they're no picnic. They're not going to be an easy team to beat. You think about Jordan Love in his first year as a full-time starting quarterback, he completed 64.2% of his pass attempts for over 4,100 yards, 32 touchdowns, 11 picks. Then on wildcard weekend, he went to Dallas and lit up the Dallas Cowboys' 5th-ranked pass defense, throwing for 272 yards and 3 touchdowns. And, this guy really started to hit stride. The Packers beat the Lions 29-22 in Detroit on Thanksgiving Day. And from that point on, Love was just absolutely unbelievable. So, yes, he made a bad decision late in the game at Levi's and gave the game-winning interception to Dre Greenlaw. And, he was late across the middle. Classic mistake from a young quarterback. But Green Bay's coming, and it's a solid organization. And they just had Xavier McKinney added to the secondary. They've got a lot of young talent, a lot of young receivers, a lot of young tight ends, great young quarterback. I think Green Bay absolutely could stand between the 49ers and a trip to the Super Bowl. And then you look at the other division, which is the NFC South. And the NFC South, last year it was Tampa. Last year Tampa was the team in the NFC South. Now I think it could be Atlanta. And you got to ask the question, is this, if Kirk Cousins is ever going to have a time, this has got to be it, right? He suffered a season-ending Achilles injury in October. But before that point, man, he was playing amazing. He was playing at a Pro Bowl level. The way he played against the Niners was the best I've ever seen him play. He averaged more than 290 passing yards per game and was completing 70% of his passes with 18 touchdowns and 5 picks. And now he moves on to Atlanta, where he's got Kyle Pitts, Drake London, Darnell Mooney from Chicago, Rondale Moore from Arizona, who's a burner. You got a new head coach in Raheem Morris, who's, they've got an outstanding blue chip running back in Bijan Robinson. They got a really good offensive line. So is this the year that Cousins comes of age and the Falcons go to the playoffs and stand between the Niners in the Super Bowl? I would say they are going to go to the playoffs. They are going to win that division. They're not going to stand in front of the Niners to win the Super Bowl. Now, I do think they'll be better than Tampa. Tampa's won the NFC South. Basically they were been hovering around 500 the last 2 years, but they still won the division both years. Last year, the Buccaneers finished with the NFL's fewest rushing yards per game. This year, they wind up losing their OC, Dave Canales, who accepted the Panthers head coaching position. So there might be some regression for the Bucs on offense. So, I definitely think Tampa is going to be hard pressed to win that division, but I still don't think Atlanta stands between the Niners and the Super Bowl. And then let's take a look at the NFC West. Last but not least, the NFC West. The Rams lose Aaron Donald, and that's a major loss. But look at some of the young players they had on their defense last year who emerged. Kobe Turner, the rookie defensive tackle from Wake Forest, had a big year. Byron Young, the edge rusher from Tennessee. These two guys combined for 17 sacks and 50 pressures on the quarterback. And then in the first round of this year's draft, the Rams took Jared Verse, who, I think was probably one of the best picks of the first round. All Verse did at Florida State was log 29.5 tackles for loss and 18 sacks over 2 seasons at FSU. And then you look at the Rams the rest of the offseason. They added Braden Fisk up front. He's a big, active defensive lineman who can play a lot of spots. Cameron Curl at safety. Cameron Kinchins at safety out of Miami. Kenny Logan, a safety out of Kansas, is a big-time hitter. Tre'Davious White. They added all 4 of those guys to their secondary. And the Rams last year had a top 8 offense scoring-wise. Stafford, Kyron Williams, Cooper Kupp, the burner, field stretching Tutu Atwell, the chain mover Puka Nacua, really underrated receiving tight end in Higbee. Now they've upgraded their offensive line. They added Blake Corum to the mix at running back, and Sean McVay has just absolutely been singing the praises of Corum throughout the spring. So the Rams are legit, and I think they are improved. Now, I don't think they're on the Niners level, but they might be able to challenge them in the division, and they might be able to make things really hard for the Niners in the 2 head-to-head matchups. So if you're saying, looking at the rest of the league, division by division, who really can stand in front of the 49ers in their pursuit of the 6th Lombardi? Well, there's always injuries, right? So injuries are always a major factor. I would say the Rams are one team that could stand in front of them if everything broke right. Green Bay could stand in front of them. Philadelphia could get in their way. Detroit, to a little bit of a lesser degree. I do think Detroit's had some phenomenal injury luck the last couple of years, and I'm not sure if they're going to be quite as fortunate injury-wise this year as they've been the last couple of years. So I think they're due for some injuries. But Detroit as well. So you got the Rams, Detroit, Philly, in the NFC, and Green Bay. Those 4 teams potentially can stand in front of the Niners. And then in the AFC, it's, the Chargers, the Chiefs, possibly the Colts, possibly the Texans, possibly the Bengals, possibly maybe the Bills. That's kind of the way I look at it. There will be, teams that get better, teams that get worse. We always see that. But once again, there's just a handful of teams that can stand between the 49ers and that 6th Lombardi. Should be a really, really fun year ahead. All right. Thanks to Pig and a Pickle for being the title sponsor of the Krug Show. Thanks to Sharp Corner Sports Cards and Collectibles for sponsoring this video. Thanks to all of you guys for supporting the Krug Show on YouTube.